Okay, so yeah, thank you, Sarah. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. Is that good?
Yep.
Perfect. Excellent. So yeah, thank you very much for having me today. Before I kick off, I just want to go through the acknowledgement of country. So here at the University of Queensland, we acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship on the lands upon which we meet. We pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country, and we recognise their valuable contributions to Australia and indeed to the global society. So thank you very much. So the topic of today's talk is really, I guess it's connecting a little bit with what you must have heard yesterday from Stephen. And Stephen and I are working on a couple of projects together. So I'm really glad that you had the opportunity to listen to what Regeneration are undertaking. So we're going to be talking about liability to resource. So certainly, within the global community, there's been a growing interest in actually looking at mine waste material as a potential resource for critical metals, but also a whole host of other minerals and indeed sort of raw materials that are necessary for the energy transition and beyond. So that's what we're going to focus on today. I am one of those speakers who is never disciplined with time, so I'm going to do my best to keep to time today, so bear with me. But before I do kick off, I also want to make some other acknowledgements, and that's to the MyWatch team. So I lead a team of researchers called Mine Waste Transformation Through Characterisation here at the University of Queensland. And they are a fantastic group of people, young geoscientists and engineers, who really have applied their skills to actually go out to characterise the very various waste materials that we have across the land here in Australia. So big thanks to them, and indeed to all of our state government and federal government funders for actually supporting this research. If you'd have asked me 10 years ago, would I, be able to apply for a $20,000 grant to look at mine waste, I probably would have looked a bit doubtful at that. But right now we're seeing, multi-millions of dollars of research money being poured into actually looking at these materials as a potential resource. And I think that's really sort of speaking to society's appetite to really address this growing issue we have with mine waste and how we can improve its management by finding those reuse opportunities. So that's sort of a broad kind of introduction. Again, you're going to hear from Richard Harrington this afternoon, and he's another fantastic speaker. But really, what I wanted to kick off with was looking at this. So, it wasn't that long ago, 2021, that Richard published this article in Nature. Firstly, great to see articles like this being published in Nature. But really, he articulated so well that we really do need to think about, where our critical resources for the future are going to come from. And in many ways, this was a really pivotal kind of article to come out to really get the whole global community thinking more seriously about where we were going to find all of those new resources that we need for the energy transition. And, certainly the visual capitalist put this graphic out, which really nicely kind of summarizes all of the different metals that we need to go into all of these new energy sources that we need to actually meet, the green target that we've kind of set as a global community. So, probably since 2021, formally through this article, but if not before, we've been thinking a lot about where our new resources are going to come from. But, as time and time again, as we consider kind of the push towards more mining, it's inevitable that we're going to be generating more waste. And, we've got to thank UN Secretary General once again for throwing mining under the bus a little bit just a couple of days ago, when, obviously in announcing the kind of the new critical energy transition minerals panel on the 26th of April, he made this statement where obviously he's concerned about the energy transition. Who isn't? But obviously for developing countries, there's obviously a lot of potential there for I guess negative issues sort of in a social context, but certainly thinking about environmental issues, there's a very big opportunity here for us to make the same mistakes that we've made in the past. Using language like toxic cloud in its way, can articulate that there could be pollution, really sets in mind that, if we're going to continue to mine, we have to be more responsible in terms of how we're going to manage these mine waste materials up front. So, we've got a twofold problem here. We've got existing mine waste materials, but we've also got to think about what we do with those future mine waste materials as well. Because, if we pivot back to something that Daniel Franks published in 2021, he was kind of articulating how many billions of tonnes might be produced, over the coming 5-year period. So I guess he was thinking about 21 to 26, and he's estimated that there'd be about 13 billion tonnes of additional tailings. And, for global context, if you find it hard to imagine what 13 billion tonnes would look like, then once again, the visual capitalist put together this graphic. And here you can kind of get the sense of, if you compare that to kind of the island of New York and Manhattan, then you can kind of see that this is a mountain range worth of material that we're going to produce. And this isn't just, static material. This is material that contains sulfides. It can present risks in terms of dust. So many environmental pollution risks are posed by these types of materials. So, in terms of kind of pivoting back to what the Secretary General said, just at the weekend, there's something in it, and we do definitely need to be doing something different as we move towards the future. And this isn't new news to anybody on this call, and it's not something new that I'm saying here at all, but it is still something very much that's on our mind. It's not something that we've got ahead of, in many ways, particularly well. I mean, if we looked at the Ernst Young kind of risks in mining from 10 years ago, I'm going to imagine that things like tailings and mine waste and net zero and climate change probably featured in those top 10s. I mean, I'd give you the challenge of going back to have a look, and I'm going to say that ESG and things like that definitely sat in the within the top 5 positions there. But tailings and waste management are still very much on the mind of our mining companies when they think about the risks in mining. That very much includes how we manage these waste rock facilities and indeed these tailings storage facilities, because we haven't really got too far away from thinking about Brumadinho, Samarco and all those tailings disasters. I mean, it was only a couple of months ago, I think, in Asia where we had another heap leach failure. So we're still seeing these tailings storage facilities fail, and the impacts to the communities are long lasting, and indeed, the financial detriments to the companies involved too. So we definitely need to do something different. And great for in terms of thinking about the stability of these tailings storage facilities, because the global community got together, they put out the global industry standard on tailings management. That came out, I guess it was 2021, 2022. And indeed, there was 15 principal areas and 77 auditable requirements that, were fed back to industry to kind of govern their tailings storage facilities in terms of the physical structure. And we've certainly seen a lot of companies now sort of go back, reevaluate their tailings dams to avoid any future Brumadinhos and Samarco type disasters from happening in the future. Has this been successful? I'm not going to debate that here, but certainly, there were some articles and reports that came out after, the publication of the global standards, sort of suggesting that maybe more could be done. And that's probably a whole day's worth of debate and topic that's probably for another time. But I guess the point is, after that big kind of physical stability events that happened concerning tailings storage facilities, we saw global action happen. And I think that's a really good thing, that actually people did get together and we had this new standard come out. But I would say that when it comes to things like acid and metalliferous drainage, I haven't seen something equivalent published to that standard as global community. And it really troubles me and also puzzles me why something like acid and metalliferous drainage isn't met as, with the same gusto that it needs to be. Because once upon a time, the United Nations did say that after climate change, acid and metalliferous drainage elution into the environment from mine waste materials was actually the second biggest global challenge that we face environmentally. So if that's the case, why have so few people heard about it? And why does it feel like, in terms of progress to actually combat AMD, that so little is being done as a global community, or so little effective work is being done? I mean, what you're looking at here is an example from Western Tasmania, and it's probably one of Australia's most famous examples when it comes to AMD elution into a riverine environment. So here we have, decades upon decades of mining, and predominantly this was for copper. And, associated with these copper minerals were things that form acid. So we had a lot of pyrite, a lot of iron sulfides contained in that material, and it oxidized and it eluted into the environment. And it's still eluting into the environment as we speak, coming from those underground adits straight into the Queen River, into the King River, and for the whole distance to, I guess, the King River Delta and into the estuary there. It's aquatically dead. And in terms of a solution to, cure this, the Tasmanian government hasn't got one on the table yet. So we need to see less of these happening in the future. And if we're going to mine more, we're only going to see more and more incidences of things like Mount Lyell occur from time to time. And I don't necessarily want more case studies to talk about. No. Recognizing that, the best way to, deal with this problem is to think of it as a source pathway receptor chain. Obviously, that's the pollutant linkage chain. And, when we look at examples like this, like Mount Lyell, what we're seeing here is, most approaches to try and manage this have been reactive. We've got a problem, we need to find a solution. We need to treat it, we need to mediate it, we need to sort of, add a neutralizer or something, or try and precipitate out the copper. They're very reactive solutions, but we're not thinking about the source pathway receptor chain from the source. But actually, if we looked at the source, and broke that chain there, then we actually have an opportunity to maybe generate some critical metals or find some resources for the energy transition, which doesn't necessarily mean that we have to develop as many new mine sites as we might have thought, when we think about meeting the future energy transition challenge. So, certainly this isn't a new school of thought. Thinking about mine waste as a potential resource is something that we've all been saying for many years. And I had the opportunity to contribute to the conversation in 2016, where, we actually explored some of the opportunities for looking at mine waste material as a resource, not necessarily for critical metals. I think at this point, this was before critical metals kind of felt like it went viral. But certainly, we've always recognised that the best way to actually de-risk, existing mine waste material is to break that source pathway receptor chain by looking at the source as a potential value. But yeah, certainly the critical mineral strategy here in Australia has been a game changer for how we look at mine waste material, because people like myself and people like Stephen and other people on the call who work very much in the mine waste space, if we've been going out characterising these sites, looking at environmental pollution and environmental legacies, things like arsenic, things like, bismuth, nickel, all these things, selenium in particular, we've recognised them as being potential contaminants. But now, because of the critical mineral strategy, the value of these has completely changed. Now, actually, we want to see lots of these materials because they could represent future resources of materials. So in terms of breaking that source pathway receptor chain at the source, it actually adds some serious weight behind that argument from a financial term, because we actually want these resources. And certainly the circular economy has also been a bit of a game changer for how we look at mine waste in this country as well. So you're looking at a map here. I've shown this 1,000 times, and unfortunately, I'm probably going to keep showing it forever. But it's a really good way to capture all of the many different sites we have across Australia where there's been reportings of mine workings captured in state government, databases and so forth. So we can see that across Australia, there's been a lot of activity, which means there's a lot of kind of residual piles. We're talking from very, significant kilometre scale tailing storage facilities to just, small mullock dumps, but they're out there, and some of them potentially might be oxidising, producing AMD. So, when we think about the diversity of these sites, it's the best job in the world that I have, because look at the variation of all of these different field sites. We need to develop very different, sampling methodologies. We need to think about, all the different sort of factors, and there's lots and lots of different materials to go out and sample. It's, no two sites are the same. And so for, if you like mineral exploration and you want to contribute to, I guess the energy transition, then certainly getting into these environments will not leave you bored, because we have over 50,000 to get into, and we've only just started scratching the surface. And so funded by lots of different state governments, and indeed with some opportunities to work a bit more collaboratively and directly with mining companies, we've actually been able to go out and sample a lot of these sites in Australia. So we've got a sort of 3 programs of work that we call Stream 1, Stream 2 and Stream 3. Now, a Stream 1 program is where we go out to a site, we sample that site in a very sort of short targeted campaign. We collect, up to 80, 100 samples from that particular site, and it can be any type of waste. It can be tailings material, it can be waste rock, it can be spent heap leach, it can be slag, anything you like, anything that's possibly present at that site. So we take about, 80 to 100 samples. We'll put that through a very methodical and detailed assay program. So we can look at the chemistry of these materials. And once we've got that chemical data, we'll then do a very targeted mineralogical study, because if we don't understand the mineralogy of these samples, and not just the bulk mineralogy, but the in situ mineralogy, like how are those minerals actually sited within that material? What grain size are they? What are they associated with? All of those factors we actually need to understand if we're going to think about mineral processing and actually recovering metals from that material. So we do a targeted mineralogy program, and once we've completed that, we then look at the mineral chemistry of particular minerals. So if we, for example, if we were chasing cobalt in pyrite, then, after we've done our bulk mineralogy and our in situ mineralogy to understand, the particle size of the pyrite and what it's kind of associated with, is it touching other sulfides? Is it touching, silicates, for example? Is that, we need that information to think about how the mineral separation is going to be. But we actually need to understand how that cobalt is sitting within the pyrite, and that's why we need the laser ablation study as well. So once we've collected all of that information, that's called a Stream 1 study, then we've got enough information there to make recommendations about if the site's fertile for that particular critical metal. And then we also get to think about, what processing methodologies might be useful for that particular site. So you can see, we've had a lot of sites across Australia that we've been working on. Some sites, the data has already been released, particularly in Queensland and Northern Territory. We're about to release 20 reports from New South Wales next month. But, we've started to work on sites in Western Australia, and in a previous life, we did a lot of work in Tasmania as well. So a lot of information we're now generating on some of the major waste facilities in Australia. Now, I haven't got time to walk through all of the 48 elements that we assay for. So I'm just going to choose one because I think it connects also with the next talks. It's focused on cobalt. So some of the early results that we've got, I'm going to share with you here. I can't share with you the New South Wales results because they're embargoed until next month, I'm afraid. But certainly there's some very juicy things going on there. So you're going to have to download those reports and tap into that. But certainly what you can see is, relative to 10 times crustal abundance, we certainly have some hot spots of cobalt situated in, I guess, the Tennant Creek area here in the Northern Territory, and certainly in the Northwest Minerals Province in Queensland, where we've actually been able to do a lot more work in terms of metallurgical recovery. So what we're looking at here is a bit more of a zoom in terms of Queensland, and indeed, we've got that screening of anything above 10 times crustal abundance we're considering to be quite elevated. So there were some sites that really stood out to us: the Osborne tailings, the Great Australia waste rock, the Kuradala, I think that was a mixture of waste rock and slag materials. And certainly at Rocklands, we've had a big tailings project there as well. So we definitely have the potential here for some future resources of cobalt, which, as we all know, we need for the energy transition. And I guess what we've done with that is we've done some further test work with various collaborators and so forth. So at Rocklands, for example, we've looked at how we can actually develop a new methodology to recover more efficiently or concentrate more efficiently the pyrite from this particular tailings storage facility using a new carrier flotation method, which JOGMEG have patented. Over at Osborne, we've worked with Cobalt Blue using their proprietary technology to actually do some test work to see if we can actually improve the concentration and the elution of cobalt from those tailings, which we have been able to do in comparison to conventional methods. And at this site, Pindora, we're looking at cobalt hosted in iron oxide. So here we've been using a new leaching technology developed by Innoveco to, again, more efficiently recover cobalt and copper from this spent heap leach material. So lots of exciting things to do, and certainly in collaboration with a lot of new startups. And it's an area of interest for students too. So this is one of my students here, Lauren Nichols. She's soon to finish her PhD, but certainly working at Capricorn Copper. She's done a very detailed cobalt deportment study to really understand where the cobalt is. If you don't do these detailed deportment studies and understand the mineralogy, you're not going to make a buck from the site, in my opinion. So she's certainly gone through that process, and she's undertaken, flotation test work as part of that, and is soon to wrap up. So it's good stuff to see young people sort of coming into this space and applying their geo skills to actually get this work done. But, the whole thing was liability to resource. That was kind of the title of my talk. And it is actually getting traction with the federal government and indeed the state government. So, federal government now bestowing grants like 2.2 million to Evolution Mining to retrieve cobalt from mine waste. And I don't want to give myself a pat on the back, but I certainly think the work that Marwatch have done has actually influenced some of these grants that we're seeing. And certainly through the Queensland state government, they're now offering $5 million to drive critical mineral discoveries in mine waste. And again, don't want to give the team too many pats on the back, but certainly our work, with the Queensland state government, I think has led to them actually seeing the value in putting out grants for explorers and startup companies like Regeneration to come to our state and actually, tap into these projects, get more samples, do more bankable tests, met test work, and actually, generate those resource models and think about what mining can look like. So really great to see those grants actually being spent to actually drive mineral exploration and mine waste for critical metals. So ultimately, our data is going to feed into this thing here called the Atlas of Australian Mine Waste. So it's currently out right now, version 1, and that was done with Geoscience Australia and also in collaboration with RMIT University. So we've mapped out, and if you know Gavin Mudd, he was instrumental in this. We've mapped out where kind of a lot of the TANG sites are across the country. But now my team, MyWatch, we're actually putting that data into these kind of, sites or cells, whatever you want to call them. And what we're really generating is pre-competitive data for investors seeking critical metal waste sites in our country. This is kind of catching on. I mean, I see other states, well, certainly in terms of the grants, definitely other states. I think the Northern Territory and New South Wales are thinking about releasing those kind of exploration grants for mine waste in a similar context. But globally, we're seeing the Americans, the Canadians, the Europeans, everyone, and even the South Africans, everyone's becoming very cognizant of developing something much like the Atlas of Australian Mine Waste. And I think that's what we need to see. So I guess, as a quick summary, that's kind of where we probably see the value sitting from the work that we've done, and really, characterizing mine waste. It's not a waste of time. The amount of times I've been in meetings, people are like, nah, it's a bit of a waste of time. It's absolutely not. If you do not characterize your mine waste, and if you do not understand the mineralogy, you will not make a buck. And characterizing that mine waste up front in any sort of project, it's not a cost. It should be seen as a strategic investment, because you can, understanding the mine waste could be something that you could then potentially remine in the future. Now, there are a lot of things that I could say, and I'm not going to, because I've definitely run out of time. But certainly one thing to just finish on is, when we think about new deposits and new resources, we have to actually do that environmental characterisation right up front. I mean, that's the key. I mean, I guess going back to the UN Secretary General's statement, we want to avoid that environmental pollution. And the way that we can really do it for future mine sites is actually to characterise it and use the new technology that's available to actually, better do that environmental forecasting and domaining. So, article that we wrote in Elements magazine came out in December. Definitely recommend you tap into that if you're interested in that type of approach to environmental de-risking upfront. And indeed, having lots of conversations. So we had the first Australian Mine Waste Symposium in February, and it was really well attended. We had about 160 people attend. We had academics, we had politicians, we had people working in government, we had startup companies, regeneration with that. We had so many people in the room wanting to talk about how we can actually, look at liability to resource of mine waste material. So this is a conversation that's only going to get bigger. So many things I could say, but I'm going to have to stop there. Thank you very much for having me today. And if you've got any questions, please get in touch with me. I think it's going to be time for us to get back out into the field now. We've got a few more sites to wrap up, so I'm actually going to be heading off at the office in a couple of days to get cracking again. So thank you very much for having me today.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Anita. Everybody, round of applause for the fabulous Anita. Thank you very, very much. Absolutely brilliant. So Anita, unfortunately, we've run out of time for questions, but you do have some coming in the chat, including one from me. So I would love it if you could try and respond to that, which would be fantastic. But everyone, please give Anita another round of applause. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Absolutely fantastic.